they actually ran. So we're on pace, and this is the next stage. He gets back, he sleeps. I've got some quotes for you before the test that will help you kind of look at some of the most important statements in the book.
Chapter
16, page 88. So one of the statements says he felt like he had slept 1,000 years. And so, that would suggest like some great change had happened, even though he's not noticeably different. So, Tucker, would you read several of those. We're just trying to do one. It's a short chapter. I want you to circle these words in that third paragraph. This was the army on the second day of battle as they prepare to fight again. The words are easy. They sat in easy attitude. Many had their backs turned to the firing, so the word backs. The youth's friend lay down, buried his face in his arms, and went to sleep. Now, remember the day before, less than 24 hours, every time they would march and stop, they'd start furiously digging little barricades and try to dig foxholes so they could fight behind them. Now, the next day, as they were marching into battle or near battle, what do? They fall asleep. They put their back to the enemy and they're relaxed. And so it shows you that the unit is already growing up. It's changing. It's growing up. And yesterday, or Friday, we looked at the movie and looked at Wilson. And Wilson, we didn't read this part together, but I like the way the book describes it. He's a different person. He's no longer the loud soldier. In fact, if anything, Henry's become the loud soldier. Henry's talking, remember he's marching with them, and he's talking about what we did yesterday, and some guy turns and says, it sounds like you fit the battle all yourself. He's talking, I think, partially to help, to protect himself. He's talking big so people think he really was a hero. But I think he's also changing. He's getting angry. One thing we didn't see yesterday was his anger. Now that Jim's dead, he's really angry at the enemy. And then Henry, as we said, as Wilson, when he comes back, Wilson is so kind, he's so patient, he even breaks up a fight. He helps other people. Remember, he was the loud soldier, the guy bragging, and so he's changed overnight. When we started this book, I asked you, and I don't think most of you probably got there, some of you may have, but at some point in your life, we talked about it with that verse, some point in your life, you're going to need, something's going to happen to change you. Now, there's going to be a moment of growth, and I asked you earlier, we don't have to talk about it now, but have you had such a thing that this experience, you can already tell, has made you more mature? And it's usually, this is like 24 hours, that's because it's a war story, and it's a story. People don't change that fast, but war tends to make people change faster than like school. School is so much the same work, it's the same every day. So those events may not come like overnight, it may take weeks and years. But Wilson has changed almost overnight. And Henry is now, the author is now noticing that the unit has changed. So instead of furiously digging holes to fight behind, they're facing the enemy, they're not literally on the front lines yet, but they're facing enemy, and they fall asleep. They put their back, you know, they're relaxed. They're not frantic and upset like they were yesterday. So we'll go to Alistair.
We were always.
Where did you finish? Always? Is that where you finished?
So he finished it.
Okay. Dutifully expressed against the brown. Yeah. Dutifully expressed against the brown dirt and peered over at the woods and up and down the line. Birds and trees interfered with his ways of vision. He could see the low line of trenches, but for a short distance. A few idle flags were perched in the dirt hills. Behind them were rows of dark bodies with a few heads sticking curiously over the top. Always the noise of skirmishers came from the woods on the front and left, and the din on the right had grown to frightful proportions. The guns were roaring without an instant's pause or breath. It seemed that the cannon had come from all parts and were engaged in stupendous wrangling. It became impossible to make a sentence heard.
Yeah, one more.
The youth wished to launch a joke, a quotation from the newspapers. He desired to say, "All quiet from Rappahannock," all quiet on the Rappahannock, but the guns refused to permit even a comment upon their roar. He never successfully concluded this sentence, but at last the gun stopped, and among the men in the rifle pits rumors again flew like birds that they were now for the most part black creatures who flapped their wings drearily near to the ground and refused to rise on any wing of hope. The men's faces grew doleful from the interpreting of omens. Tales of hesitation and uncertainty on the part of those high in place of responsibility came to their ears. Stories of disaster were borne into their mind, with many proofs. The din of musketry on the right, growing like a released genie of sound, expressed and emphasized the army's flight.
That's good. Jackson.
The men were disheartened and began to mutter. They made gestures expressive of the sentence, what more can we do? And it could always be seen that they were bewildered by the alleged news and could not fully comprehend the defeat. Before the gray mist had been totally obliterated by the sun rays, the regiment was marching in a spread column that was retiring carefully through the woods. The disordered, hurrying lines of the enemy could sometimes be seen down through the groves and little fields. They were yelling shrill and exultant. At this sight, the youth forgot many personal matters and became greatly enraged. He exploded in nonsenses. Jimmy were generaled by a lot of lunkheads.
I just wrote in the margin, Henry's angry again, and that's a good sign. He is changing. Wilson changed by getting gentler and more quiet. Henry seems to be changing in the other direction because he was the quiet one yesterday. He wasn't saying anything. Today he's running his mouth. Part of it is because he's changed. He's angry. He really is angry, and that's for a soldier. That's not a bad thing to have. Lily.
More than one feller has sent this today, observed a man. His friend recently aroused was still very drowsy. He looked behind him until his mind took in the meaning of the movement. Then he sighed. "Oh, well, I suppose we got licked," he remarked sadly. The youth had a thought that it would not be handsome for him to freely condemn other men. He made an attempt to restrain himself, but the words upon his tongue were too bitter. He presently began a long and intricate denunciation of the commander of the forces. Maybe it wasn't all his fault, not altogether. He did the best he knew. It was our luck it licked often, said his friend in a weary tone. He was trudging along with stooped shoulders and shifting eyes like a man who had been caned and kicked.
Notice how Wilson responds. He's defending the commander. Well, Henry's attacking him, saying they don't know what they're doing. Wilson, unlike him, completely unlike him, is saying, "Oh, maybe it's not his fault," so forth. And then Henry responds. We'll read one more.
"Well, don't we fight like the devil? Don't we do all the men can?" demanded the youth loudly. He was secretly dumbfounded at the sentiment when it came from his lips. For a moment his face lost its valor, and he looked guiltily about him. But no one questioned his right to deal in such words. And presently he recovered his air
We saw that in the movie. That was the guy said, you sound like you fought the whole battle. Why does that bother him?
Because he didn't fight it at all.
Right, and so he was thinking, maybe he knows, maybe he's making fun of me because he knows I ran away, and that's the one thing he's trying to cover. But he didn't know. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah, you said you needed to fill that up. Let him go first. All right, keep going.
The noise of firing jogged their footsteps. Sometimes it seemed to be driven a little way, but it always returned again with increased insolence. The men muttered and cursed, throwing black looks in its direction. In a clear space, the troops were at last halted. Regiments and brigades broken and detached for their encounters with pickets, threw together again and wanted to face toward the pursuing barge of the enemy's infantry. The noise, following like the yellings of eager metallic hounds, increased to a loud and joyous burst, and then, as the sun went serenely up the sky, throwing illuminating rays into the gloomy thickets, it broke forth into prolonged pealings. The woods began to crackle as if fire. Whoop-a-dee, said a man. Here we are, everybody fighting, blood and destruction. I was willing to bet they'd attack as soon as the sun got fairly up, savagely asserted the lieutenant who commanded the youth's company. He jerked without mercy at his little mustache. He strode to and fro with dark dignity in the rear of his men, who were lying down behind whatever protection they had collected.
Good.
Battery had trundled into position in the rear and was cautiously showing the distance. The regiment unmolested as yet waited the moment when the gray shadows of the over them should be slashed by the lines of the flank. There was much growling and swearing. Good God, the youth grumbled. They're always being chased around like rats. It makes me sick. Nobody seems to know where we go or why we go. We just get fired around from pillar to post and get licked here and get licked there. Nobody knows what's it's done for. It makes a man feel like damn kitten in a bag. Now I'd like to know what the eternal thunders were we was marched into the woods for anyhow. Unless it was to give the revs a regular pot shot at us. We came in here and got our legs all tangled up in these cuss briars. And then we began to fight, and the Revs had an easy time of it. Don't tell me it's just a luck. I know better. It's turned to all.
All right, thanks.
Good, Bobby.
Bracket that. Bracket that is, I just wrote the word angry. That's, so far, that's the best speech we've said. He's really angry at the situation, which bodes well for the future. Julian. Read.
We had,
The friend.
seemed jaded.
The friend saying here.
The friend seemed jaded, but he interrupted his comrade with his voice of calm confidence. It will turn out all right in the end, he said. Oh, the devil it will. You always talk like a dog, James Parson. Don't tell me, I know. At this time, there was an interposition by the savage-minded lieutenant, who was obliged to vent some of his inward dissatisfaction upon his men. You will shut right up. There's no need, Nita, you're wasting your breath in a long-winded argument about this and that and the other. You've been jawing like a lot of old men. All you've got to do is to fight, and all you got plenty of that to do in about 10 minutes. Less talking and more fighting is what best for you boys. I never saw such gabbling jackasses. He paused, ready to pounce upon any man who might have the temerity to reply. No words being said, he resumed his dignified pacing.
James.
And then he paused.
Yeah.
He paused ready to pounce upon any man who might have the temerity to reply. No words being said, he resumed his dignified pacing. There's too much chin music and too little quiet in this war, anyhow, he said to them, turning his head for a final remark. The day had grown more white until the sun shed his full radiance upon the throng before us. A sort of a gust of guile came sweeping toward that part of the line where lay the youth regiment. The front shifted a trifle to meet it squarely. There was a wait. In this part of the field, there passed slowly the intense moments that precede the tempest. A single rifle flashed in the thicket before the regiment. In an instant, it was joined by many others. There was a mighty song of clashes and crashes that went sweeping through the woods. The guns in the rear
They're getting ready to be attacked. We're gonna read just a little bit more. What I'll do Wednesday, I'm gonna put you in those groups Wednesday. We might be able to go outside to do it. But let's finish, we only have about 5 minutes. Let's finish this. This is a pivotal chapter. Remember, this whole book is to be finished. We will not finish it in class. We may not read anymore until you come in Thursday. So would you read this?
This advance of the enemy had seemed to the youth like a ruthless hunting. He began to fume with rage and aspiration. He beat his foot upon the ground and scowled with hate at the swirling smoke that was approaching with like a phantom flood. There was a maddening quality in the seeming resolution of the foe to give him no rest, to give him no time to sit down and to think, and think. Yesterday he had fought and had fled rapidly. There had been many adventures. For today he felt that he had earned opportunities for contemplative repose. He could have enjoyed portraying to listeners various scenes at which he had been a witness or a bride discussing the process of war with other approved men. 2, it was important that he should have time for physical, he was sore and stiff from his experiences. He had received his full of exertions and he wished to rest.
I think that word was repercussions. So Sarah and Harvey, maybe you can finish out just this little bit. There's one paragraph I really want us to read.
But those other men seemed never to grow weary. They were fighting with their old speed. He had a wild hate for the relentless foe. Yesterday, when he imagined the universe to be against him, he had hated it. Little gods and big gods, today he hated the army of the foe with the same great hatred. He was not going to be badgered of his life, like a kitten chased by boys. He said, it was not well to drive men into final corners. At the moment, they could all develop anything false. He leaned and spoke into his friend's ear. He menaced the boys with a gesture. If they keep on chasing us, by God, they better watch out. Can't stand too much. The friend twisted his head and made a calm reply. If
Hang
they
on.
keep on, you can keep going.
Yeah, would you bracket the paragraph right above that where it says, but those other men, would you bracket that? He is, he hates the enemy. We talked earlier about his anger. Now his anger is really focused and funneled. And I think we'll just save this, but I want to give you these papers. Remember, the book is due Thursday. That's what you need to be working